For the past several weeks, the Russian army has brutally invaded Ukraine. Throughout these weeks, cities, along with both military and civilian targets across the country, have become subjected to devastating Russian missile and air attacks raining down from the skies. Across major Ukrainian cities home to millions of people like Lviv, Kyiv, and Kharkiv, the chilling sounds of air raid sirens have begun sounding alarm to residents for the first time since World War II, while thousands have been forced to take shelter beneath the ground in increasingly packed metro stations. Scenes eerily reminiscent of Britons in the London Tube throughout the German Blitz campaign of 1940. And just like for months during that era, the battle for control of the skies over Ukraine is ongoing, with neither side so far being capable of achieving complete air superiority, even though the Ukrainian Air Force is overall badly outgunned. The Russian Air Force possesses around 11 times as many fighters, 24 times as many dedicated attack or bomber craft, and roughly 13 times as many helicopters as the Ukrainian Air Force has got. In a longer war of attrition, with all things else being equal, the Russians simply have the numbers to continue sustaining heavy losses in the air, while the Ukrainians do not. And so the math for eventual air superiority is on the Russian side. And once air superiority is achieved, the likelihood for a Kremlin victory in some form or another increases dramatically. Therefore, throughout the agonizing weeks of this war, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, along with numerous Ukrainian civilians and diplomats, have pleaded with the West, America, and NATO to assist the country by ordering a total closure of the skies above to Russian warplanes. A no-fly zone.
To create a no-fly zone over Ukraine.
Sanctions now! Sanctions now!
The accurate description of what people mean by a no-fly zone is actually an aerial combat zone.
A no-fly zone, if people understood what it means World War III.
Because if an American pilot shoots down a Russian pilot, that's a declaration of war.
Many parliaments within NATO allied countries of Eastern and Northern Europe like Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Slovenia have all called for the no-fly zone to be established. But despite all of these urgent requests, poll after poll carried out across countries in Western Europe have consistently shown low support among the general Western European public for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. However, the same cannot be said of the American public, where several polls there have shown consistently high support for one throughout the invasion, like a poll from Reuters on the 4th of March that showed 74% of Americans supported the implementation of a no-fly zone, a CBS poll from the 11th of March that found 59% of Americans supported one, and a Quinnipiac poll from the 16th of March that found nearly 1 in 3 Americans still disagreed with President Biden's decision to not impose one. But despite all of this public pressure within, and the mounting pressure coming in from NATO allies, and the Ukrainian government and civilians, President Biden and NATO have thus far continuously resisted these pleas, and steadfastly refused to implement the no-fly zone over Ukraine. And they are unfortunately correct to continue doing so. And these are all of the many reasons why. Despite the apparent fact that many Americans are in favor of the no-fly zone, I'd also wager that most of those Americans don't really understand what a no-fly zone actually means. It means setting up a zone, in this case the entirety of the airspace above Ukraine, and then demanding that no flights from anyone take place through that zone. The biggest danger with declaring a no-fly zone like this is what happens after the declaration, because the declaring power must be willing to enforce it. If Russian jets decide to ignore the demand and continue their operations, then it means that NATO and American jets must fly in and engage them, potentially resulting in aerial battles between American and Russian pilots, with the high chance for casualties taking place on either side. In the past 30 years, America and its allies have declared 4 of these no-fly zones with various results. A northern and southern no-fly zone in Iraq leading up to the Gulf War and the 2003 US invasion, a no-fly zone over Bosnia in the mid-1990s, and another over Libya in 2011. In each of these cases, the United States utilized its vastly superior air force and conventional military capabilities to enforce its will in the skies against opponents who could offer up little resistance. Saddam's Iraq, the Republika Srpska proto-state in Bosnia, and the Serbian government, and Gaddafi's Libya. In the most recent no-fly zone that was declared over Libya back in 2011, American and NATO warplanes managed to completely alter the course of the entire Libyan civil war that was going on against Gaddafi by denying his forces any access to the skies and bombing his strategic positions on the ground. And NATO didn't lose a single plane throughout that entire operation because they were overwhelmingly more powerful. But a no-fly zone over Ukraine would be inherently different from all of these, because Russia possesses far, far more capabilities to retaliate than any other target of an American no-fly zone has before. Despite Russia's military setbacks in Ukraine, the Russian armed forces are generally still considered to be the second most powerful in the world behind the United States, with the second highest number of ballistic missile submarines in service, and one of only 3 militaries worldwide that operate strategic bombers. But the greatest military asset that Russia possesses that none of those other regimes in the past did is a lot of nuclear weapons. In fact, Russia has at its disposal the single largest nuclear arsenal in the world, with approximately 6,000 total warheads. For the sake of comparison, the United States has only around 4,000 warheads, and of all the nuclear weapons in the world combined, Russia owns nearly half of them. Of critical importance to understand, however, these 6,000 warheads can be divided into 2 different categories: strategic arms and tactical arms. Strategic nuclear arms are the big, scary ICBMs that you usually think about from the movies that fly on top of a missile fired from a silo or a submarine that are powerful enough to destroy an entire city. The point of strategic nuclear weapons like these, though, is to never actually use them. They're only there for deterrence, to dissuade the enemy from ever being tempted into using theirs, and thus they guarantee mutually assured destruction if one side ever deploys them. From the perspective of the Kremlin, however, tactical nuclear arms are viewed very differently. These are significantly less powerful and destructive nuclear weapons, with only a fraction of the power of the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, that can be fired from artillery, rocket launchers, or even planes onto a battlefield. They are explicitly designed to be used as a more restrained or limited option by an army to meet battlefield objectives, and critically, the Russian military defense doctrine currently approves of their use in the armed forces under certain conditions, like covering a major retreat operation. Out of Russia's total arsenal of 6,000 nuclear warheads, it's believed that around 2,000 of them are these kinds of smaller tactical nukes, and the centerpiece of this Russian strategy of battlefield nuclear deterrence is the Iskander-M, a mobile missile launcher that can fire either conventional or tactical nuclear warheads at a range of roughly 500 kilometers. And prior to the invasion of Ukraine, satellite images revealed these exact Iskander missile batteries deployed by Russia inside of Belarus with unknown payloads, but with the range to strike nearly every major target inside of Ukraine. This doomsday arsenal must be taken into consideration when deciding on a no-fly zone over Ukraine, because sending in NATO and American jets to shoot down Russian planes who violate the no-fly zone would only really be the beginning of the operation. In order to keep their own planes safe, a no-fly zone would also likely entail NATO airstrikes on Russian air defense and support targets down on the ground, like airfields, surface-to-air missile or SAM batteries, and radar facilities. However, not all of these targets would be limited to the ground within Ukraine. Some of Russia's more advanced SAM batteries, like the S-400, have a range of 400 kilometers, meaning that they could cover wide swaths of Ukrainian airspace from behind the borders inside of Russia or Belarus. Neutralizing them would necessitate bombing targets on the ground inside of Russia or Belarus itself. And thus, it shouldn't really come as any surprise then that Putin has stated that any attempt by the United States or NATO to impose a no-fly zone over Ukraine would be effectively treated as the United States and NATO directly entering the conflict.